So today we're going to talk about how to go about using Audacity as a way to both record and edit your podcast episodes. We're keeping it really simple here. Today we're just going to assume that you have got a microphone that you can hook up to your desktop or your laptop, and that you'll be recording straight to Audacity. If you don't have a microphone, you can actually check out Snowball Mics from the university library. So one possible option that you could do would be to book out one of the group study rooms, check out one of the microphones, and then just start recording to the laptop in one of those rooms with your group. I think that's a really good way to go about this project. The microphones are super easy to use. They just connect with a USB cable and they're essentially good to go. So once you've got your microphone hooked up and you've got Audacity open, first thing you're going to want to do is make sure that you have selected the Blue Snowball mic or whatever external microphone you might be using. If you don't do that, it will default to using the microphone that's internal to your laptop. And while that will work, it's not going to produce the same kind of sound quality. So what we're going to do right now is start recording. In order to do that, you just hit record and you can start talking. So I'm going to set us up with a generic podcast intro, and then we'll take it from there. Welcome to today's podcast. I am your host, Professor DiBiase, and today we're going to be talking about some of the concepts that we've been discussing in our ENW 100 class. In particular, we'll be taking a look at Doug Down's discussion of rhetorical ecologies and John Mock's notion of location as it pertains to educational landscapes. So we've got our recording. Levels look pretty good. And if we play back, you'll be able to hear the audio content. Welcome to today's podcast. I am your host, Professor DiBiase, and today we're going to be talking about some of the concepts that we've been discussing in our ENW 100 class. In particular, we'll be taking a look at Doug Down's discussion of rhetorical ecologies and John Mock's notion of location as it pertains to educational landscapes. So the first thing that we're going to do with this little clip is we're going to trim some of the audio at the beginning and the end. You'll notice here, if you look at the waveform, that there's a bit of gap between when I start the recording and when I actually begin speaking, so we can trim that out really easily. This is our select tool, so we can just click and drag the sections that we want to eliminate and just hit delete, and we can trim that out, and we can hear the beginning now is a little bit tighter. Welcome to today's podcast. And if we go to the end of the podcast recording, we can also do a little bit of trimming there. Landscapes. So we can get rid of this extra space here. And again, I'm just hitting delete. So now that we've gotten rid of that extra space, we have the start of our podcast. It's not a terrible idea to record your podcast in pieces. It can make it a little bit easier to edit around anything that you're not particularly happy with. So you might record your introduction as a group and then stop and then create a new track to record the next piece of your podcast, or at least create a nice clean break so that you have room to edit around it. So if I want to pick up the recording, I could just hit record again. So now we're just doing our second part of our podcast, and this is something that we can move around later. And this line will sort of demarcate where you began and start, began and ended your recording session. And this way, it makes it easier to split these things up. So for example, I could use this is called the time shift tool. I could select this portion and just slide it down, and then potentially I could put something else in that space. For now, we'll get rid of this because we don't really need this section. So that's basically how you go about recording the actual content. Now, if you want to add some of those genre features that we were talking about, such as music, there are some really easy ways to go about and do that. So what you're going to be looking for, ideally, is what we call Creative Commons licensed music, because music with a Creative Commons license is music that the creators are giving you permission to use as long as you attribute them somewhere in the source document. So if you are looking for music for your project, we can go to Google and we'll go to Creative Commons, open source music, so we can use it and not worry about any sort of major problems. So we'll go to the freemusicarchive.org/Creative Commons. If you look, there'll be a variety of genres. So earlier I grabbed something from the old time historic and download Lobo Loco from the artist Lobo Loco track Brain Instrumental Retro. If you click on the arrow, you can download. Click here and you'll be able to download that file. Now I've already downloaded this file before, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to just go into my browser, my Explorer, pull that file from my downloads and just drag it in. And we'll notice the file is much longer than the recording, so we're just going to trim it. We're not going to need the whole thing. We'll say we're just going to use sort of the first section. So we'll just get rid of the remainder of the piece. And if we want to listen to it and figure out how much of it we want to use, we can mute this track, mute our audio track, our vocal track, and just play our music track. It's got sort of a bluesy vibe to it. I'm going to zoom in a little bit so I can just see the track a little bit better. So if we go in here, we can look about the 20-second mark. We're going to get rid of everything else. Tracks, we're just going to take a little bit of it. Now, we don't want these two things playing over one another. We're going to unmute our vocal track. We'll use the time shift tool to slide our audio down. So this assumes that the instrumental track will come in before our vocal track. From there, what we're going to do is, if we listen to it, and we'll just sort of jump ahead over here, we'll go back to select, start from over here, about 14 seconds in. Welcome to today's podcast. I am your host, Professor DiBiase. So that works pretty well, but what you notice is you can really hear the sound sort of trail out there, and that's not really ideal. It's a very abrupt ending to the music. Also, at full volume, it sort of cuts over the spoken word portion. So what we're going to do is I'm actually going to pull the spoken word back a little bit. It's about 14 seconds into the track. And then what I'm going to do is highlight a portion of the music track, both before and after the vocals kick in, and use the effect option to fade out. And what you'll see here visually is that it will become quieter as it plays in. So if we listen to it now, welcome to today's podcast. I am your host, Professor DiBiase, and today we're going to be talking about some of the concepts that we've been discussing in our ENW 100 class, in particular. And if we're not quite happy with that, we can still tweak it a little bit. I might want to pull this back just a little so that the volume on the music track has decayed just a little bit more before my voice starts to kick in. Welcome to today's podcast. I am your host, Professor DiBiase, and today we're going to be and there we go. And so what we've done in just a few minutes is set up an introductory track to our introduction portion of our podcast. We've found some music that we can use with a Creative Commons license, and we've inserted it in so that it precedes our introduction and has a nice little effect to fade out as we begin our speech.